How are you, man?
I'm doing good, man. Working on some other stuff. Finally got to see In the Heights a couple of weeks ago. Very moving experience. The studios lifted the embargo on reviews today, 3 weeks before it opens, and every single critic I know is going hog wild publishing the reviews. And I'm of the position like, why publish something now when people won't have access to the movie until 3 weeks down the road and are not going to be part of the conversation? I mean, the idea of a review is that you want people to be part of the conversation,
Right.
but we live in this environment of me firstism in which
Ugh.
everybody and their mother has to publish at the same time because we need to be first.
Yeah.
And that's annoying because people don't realize, and they should, that In the Heights is opening a week before the Rita Moreno documentary opens in theaters nationwide, which you could argue, and I think I'm going to make that argument in my review. I don't know if either in the Heights or for the Rita, but that you can draw a line between Rita and In the Heights and Lin Manuel and everything that's happened after In the Heights. I mean, she opened the doors for people like Lin Manuel to write, produce In the Heights and Hamilton, even though it was difficult for Lin Manuel to get anything done early in his career. So
Rita
to me,
Moreno,
that's a
you're talking
very
about?
important. Yeah, Rita Moreno. The new documentary is coming out on the 18th.
Did you see what she
In the
said
Heights is opening
about
on the
J Lo?
11th. No, I haven't. I need to check it out.
A couple weeks ago, she said something about J Lo's great and everything, but we need somebody more than J Lo to be representing Latino arts, especially in
Oh, and
Hollywood.
and I think he's absolutely right. No Latino should be bearing the weight of the industry. I mean,
Right.
that applies for Yellow and it applies for Heaven Help Us. What's her name from Family? Oh, the Colombian. Jesus, I forgot her name. Who always acts like if she were a freaking bimbo.
Oh, the she plays the mom in what it one
The
day
thing
one
about Family, yeah, Modern Family.
oh Modern Family.
Uh,
Sofia Vergara.
Sofia Vergara, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
no single Latino should be carrying the weight of an entire industry. And in that respect, I think Rita is talking from experience because for a while she was carrying that weight,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know?
she's the only Latino. Well, now there's another guy, right? A young guy who's got an EGOT.
Yeah,
He's like 39, 40, something like that.
something like that. Yeah, got to
Yeah.
check out who that is. But yeah, I mean, I think Rita in that regard is speaking from experience. I mean, she's not really saying let's avoid it. There's a history. We shouldn't be repeating history. We should be opening more opportunities. Gaylor shouldn't be carrying the burden.
Yeah.
Sophia shouldn't be carrying the burden. Oscar Isaac shouldn't be, Lynn shouldn't be carrying the burden. So I
Yeah.
think in that regard, she's absolutely right.
Well, I mean, what is that? Is it the industry that picks who they're gonna the mainstream industry picking? Okay, let's pick out which Latinos we're gonna raise up as representatives of Latino art.
Not necessarily. I don't say. I wouldn't say necessarily as representatives. I remember the industry plays it safe. So right now they're going like, oh well, Oscar Isaac. This is a safe bet now because he's done these many films. Benicio del Toro, he's a safe bet because he's done these many films. The
Yeah.
problem is that when you fall into that mode of thinking, you're not opening the doors for younger talent to come in, which I will argue is the reason why In the Heights is so important because all of a sudden you have all this great young Latino talent on screen that could very well become the future Oscar Isaacs, Benicio, Sophia's, Jennifer's, you name it. But the problem is that because the studios and remember, it's not the old studio system any longer. These are now run by corporations. So in the same way that they do franchise films because they're safe, they're going to go after those names that are familiar, that have some sort of recognition. Even though people like Oscar and Benicio took them forever to build on that recognition, now they're carrying that burden too,
Yeah.
because they're the known entities.
Right.
The studios are not going to
It's a business
always
decision.
spend
They're not thinking about art. They're thinking about what's going to bring in the most revenue, and known
exactly
people will bring in the most revenue.
exactly, and who's gonna bring the audiences. I mean, that's the reality.
I,
I mean, that's why in a way In the Heights is to be celebrated because you have all this new talent on screen,
yeah.
sharing spaces with the veterans like Jimmy Smith, and you suddenly realize these are the people who could very well be the future of the industry, the future of Latino representation. But again, you got to make sure, the studios need to make sure, and the talent needs to make sure that they don't fall on that trap of carrying the burden
Yeah.
for the community, of
Yeah.
being the only ones. It shouldn't be that way.
No, it's weird. Like we get stuck on oh, somebody will come out. This happens in music too, right? Somebody comes
Mm-hmm.
out with an album and it's a great album. It's their debut album, and the general public, or I don't know what's going on, but it's partly the general public, it's partly the business decisions, right? They go, okay, make another one just like that. Make another album just like that. Keep giving us that for 10 years, the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, that's not art. That's not interesting.
Yeah, that's correct. And,
even if it brings in revenue and gets an audience, it's going to stagnate. It's actually going to, in the end, hurt art.
And that's why, even whether you like him or not, people like Bad Bunny are really interesting cases because they're doing it on their own terms.
Yeah.
They are the ones releasing the music on their own terms. They are the ones using the platforms. They're not relying on the industry. Yeah, the music may all sound the same, but they're doing it on their own terms and at their own rhythm. Yeah. What I found fascinating looking at Puerto Rico's Latin alternative scene in the last 15 months is that a lot of artists like Residente, Fofe, Circle, Alegría Rampante, Los Walters, they've been releasing tracks slowly, like getting stuff out there. And once they have everything together, then they release the full album. But they are releasing it independently. They're releasing it on their own terms. Ile just released a track, and they're releasing it on their own, leading up to the release of the album. But they're doing it on their own terms. And that's an interesting trend,
especially in music. I know you're first of all, introduce yourself. You are our Mono Magazine's movie and TV's editor. Introduce yourself, and then I'll puff you up a little bit more.
Absolutely. So we have already started the conversation. So I'm Alejandro Riera. I'm the movies TV editor for Mono Magazine. I write as well for gozamos.com, filmcritic.com, and I do press relations for several cultural organizations like the Latino Film Festival, the Ruiz Belvis Cultural Center, working currently on a little press release for Julian Jumping Perez's final drive-in concert over at SeatGeek Stadium. Man of many hats.
Yeah, many hats. I know you from my Gozamos days, and whenever it was Latino Film Festival time, which was in March, or anything film related, really, you were our point man between us and the movie and the studios and the actors and everybody. You were like our liaison. And so when I started Mono and I knew I wanted a movies and TV editor, I was like, Alejandro. And you're the first person I asked. And I thought, maybe you'd say no, but I'm the kind of person I go for my dream get right first. Why skirt around it? And so I'm very honored and happy to have you on. And you've been coming out with amazing reviews of movies that wouldn't get attention. Even in the Latino media wouldn't get attention. And case in point, like today, you sent me this fucking monster of a movie review. I already forgot the name of it. What is
New Order? New Order. Michel Franco's new film.
And
a very problematic film.
Well, I haven't seen the film. You have. I'm assuming.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. I did see it.
Yeah, you go through it. You go through the whole thing.
Yeah.
And the trailer, I'm like, I need to see that movie. But talk to us about the controversy around that film.
Well, here's the thing. The film was premiered at the Venice Film Festival last year, and I think it had a simultaneous commercial release in Mexico. So when the trailer was released by Mexican film chain Cinépolis, the controversy exploded around these images of this wealthy family celebrating a wedding being besieged by these protesters, mostly indigenous looking, with guns in their hands, falling under attack. Mm-hmm. Then the trailer goes into showing segments from the second half of the film, but it shows them out of context. So that led many people, especially in a country like Mexico, that is so full of class and racial inequities, to think that this was a film that portrayed the working class, that portrayed people who legitimately were protesting social inequities around the world as the villains of the piece, as terrorists, as looters, as people lacking an ideology. Michel Franco, after the premiere in Venice, claimed that he wanted the film to be ambiguous, that he was inspired by mass protests around the world and the repressive acts against those mass protests, and trying to bring it a contemporary context. He started alluding to Black Lives Matter, to the protest movements in Paris, and then people say, "Well, hold on a second. The problem is that by not explaining the reason why in the film, and not alluding in the trailer, at least, to the reasons why these people are protesting, you're playing into the right wing's game of like mass protesters are looters and all they cause is violence." But he didn't want to refute that. He said, watch the film, discuss it. And a lot of critics have watched the film. Some of them applaud that ambiguity. Some of them find it that even though it's hard to watch, the film sort of looks at, precisely that repressive system and how some movements, how governments worldwide respond to those movements with more repression.
Right.
I've watched the film. My problem with the film is that so-called ambiguity comes to bite Michel in the ass, because he makes this one member of the family the key protagonist, or the closest thing that we have to a protagonist. And she's a member of that wealthy 1%er community. And she's the one who shows some heart to another character in the film. And she's the one who suffers the worst in the film at the hands of this military, rogue military group behind the coup. Not to spoil, well, people can read the review and find out exactly what's going on. But my problem with the film is that, while he's showing how the working class is repressed by this new military government in the second half of the film through certain measures like curfews, work permits, whatnot, this rich girl, is being tortured and raped alongside a whole bunch of 1%ers. So you start wondering, wait, hold a second, time out. Why are you driving your sympathies towards her? What's the purpose of that? Yes, some of these working class people, some of these protagonists face a lethal fate at the end of the film. And there's a major cover-up, et cetera, et cetera. But you start wondering, you start asking these questions, and you start saying, well, it's not really ambiguous, because once you create, and in any film and in any narrative, once you create a person towards to whom you as an audience, a member of the audience, feel some sympathy, you're showing your cards, okay? You're literally laying the cards on the table. There's no ambiguity about it. And that's one of the key issues I'm having with the film, that he's being such a smartass about, challenging us to question his intentions and claiming ambiguity, that when you look at it seriously, after the shock is over, you start asking yourself questions such as, well, why are these people at the beginning of the film protesting? Why are they committing this violent act? Why do we have to connect the dots and bring it, So you start asking a series of questions to the filmmaker that are not really clear where he stands. He may have wanted that. My opinion is that he's pretty much, he's pretty much, as I said in the review, sticking his middle finger at a tradition in Latin American cinema and literature and arts, a political tradition, a committed, engaged political tradition in the Latin American arts, which, more often than not is left-leaning. But he's pretty much saying, screw all that work that came before me. I'm going to be ambiguous, and I'm going to be an agent provocateur, and I'm going to create this provocation act and, deal with it. And it's rather nihilistic and problematic. In that regards, it is, for those of us who follow Latin American cinema, a very important film to watch and discuss. Right. That doesn't make it more or less, a film lacking in any sense of morality. Or morality is the only word I can think of right now, to be quite honest.
A controversial film is a film that you should watch, right? I mean, that's
Absolutely.
what it is. I mean, it's not a film that you should avoid.
Absolutely. But the problem is that, in the end, what was your purpose behind this film? I mean, you start wondering what was the reasoning behind it. And then you add that, you start comparing that film to other recent films that have handled these class disputes, this class warfare, like Bong Joon-ho's extraordinary Parasite, in which he shows some empathy to both sides, and you can feel the empathy on both sides, but you can also feel the resentment that one side feels towards another. But it's not that sort of, it's not like these are this particular family in Parasite belongs to any movement. They just take action on their own because
in Parasite you get the sense that Parasite you get the sense that everybody's a victim of this system.
Exactly. Whereas in here, whereas in New Order, everybody's a victim, but of what you exactly don't know. Yeah. You're not quite sure.
Just from your review, I mean, the way you paint it out, and Michel Franco, I looked him up, like you say, everybody at the wedding is light skinned, well to do, mm-hmm. and yep. Michel himself is light skinned and presumably well to do, right? He's a director, he's making movies.
Middle class.
And the protesters, there's protests outside, but nobody knows what they're protesting about. Mm-hmm. And when they come in, they're all dark, they're all indigenous.
Exactly. And
so it's literally black and white.
Exactly. And not only that, but again, because the victims of this torture are members of that wealthy class, of that wealthy right. white class. I didn't mention this again in the review because I don't want to give that much away, but that rogue group of soldiers are themselves dark skin toned.
Right.
They're part of that lower class of the army, of the Mexican army, of the Mexican armed forces. People from these smaller, poor communities have no choice but to join the armed forces because, that's the only way they can bring sustenance.
Which is a really family. Played out way of doing cinema, right?
Exactly. So it's very obvious that whether it's the protesters or this rogue faction of the armed forces, they're all people of color.
Yeah.
Whereas the mucky mucks in the military who are trying to find out this daughter in the film are all, guess what? White.
And what's the moral of the story? Don't be like Marianne. Don't try to sympathize with the other side because you'll get raped and tortured.
Exactly. Exactly. That pretty much is it. I mean, that's the problem. That's why I'm calling it morally dubious. It's controversial, but it's so morally dubious that you have to be, you have to condemn the reprehensibility of it at all. I mean, that's why I thought that most of these scenes reminded me more of Joker. I mean, the way they use, again, all these mass protests to drive at a political point of this massless group of people attempting against the system for whatever reason. Joker is very clear about that in the end. Yeah. That it's not merely a film about some schmuck who turns into the Joker. It's also a film about how this schmuck becomes the clueless leader of a movement against people identify 1%. With him.
People identify with him. Exactly. And you're talking about the Joker. We mentioned this before when we were talking. That that was the same thing with Chris Nolan's.
Chris Nolan's, especially The Dark Knight Rises, the final one.
Right.
I mean, it's more obvious in the final one than in Dark Knight.
Right.
I mean, whereas in Dark Knight, it's pretty much the Joker as a figure of chaos in this city. Yeah.
He likes chaos.
And you're talking about corruption.
But Bane's talking like an anarchist revolutionary. There's that great scene where he's outside the prison, right? He goes, exactly. I'm giving you the city. The city's yours. Exactly. It doesn't belong to the powers that be. It belongs to you. Take it.
Exactly.
And that's... I mean, what's the difference between that and any revolutionary in history, right?
Exactly. But and that's the thing where in the film, in the end, but again, here's the interesting thing. Yeah, but here's the interesting thing about The Dark Knight Rises and all these comic book films that people don't want to acknowledge as they embrace this genre is that in the end, any and every single superhero is a defender of the powers that be. Yeah. They are there to bring back order. They're not there to do something heroic. When the Avengers fight aliens, yes, they may be saving the citizens of New York, but they're there to restore order.
Yeah, Batman's best friend is the chief of police, right? And he's working with the DA.
Exactly.
He's working with the mayor.
But you see, but here's the interesting thing. I mean, when you look at the origins of Batman, we're gonna go comic book geek here for a second. Batman was originally a detective.
Right.
I mean, when you think about it, he was a detective. That's why he fought crime. It wasn't like him being this figure against the masses. He was he was a vigilante and a detective who fought crime.
And the son of the richest man.
The richest man. But because he had the wherewithal, he could do this and help the police. It's in later interpretations when, and I think it starts way back to Frank Miller's The Dark Knight when he did that revisionist comic graphic novel about a retired elderly Batman who ended up being like this bitter shell of his former self. When comic writers started looking at the superhero genre and superhero characters as precisely that sort of law and order, that sort of tool of the establishment to preserve some sort of law and order in the community, in society at large. And I think Dark Knight Rises in that regards is the ultimate outcome of that mentality. The problem is that people like Frank Miller and Alan Moore, with Watchmen, were criticizing that mentality.
Right.
And the films that are coming out of these, comic book, they're coming out from DC and Marvel, celebrate that legacy instead of criticizing or taking an analytical look at it. I mean, if you look at Watchmen is a condemnation precisely of the way superheroics could be used by a fascist government to preserve the status quo. Yeah. Whereas, and it's a critique.
Right.
That's the thing that Zack
Snyder... Funny that, I think the studios are going, we're in a highly politicized time, right? And I think the studios are leaning into the superhero genre. You saw Childish Gambino, a.k.a. Danny Glover, say this, that, art is boring because nobody wants to step on anybody's toes politically or socially. And so I think the studio, one, superheroes sell, comics sell. But two, there's quote, they're pitching it as it's not political, it's just an action film. But even then, it's political, right?
Yeah.
Like you're saying, these superheroes are working for the powers that be, and they establish order how? Through force. That's fascism.
Yeah. And that was the critique of Alan Moore's Watchmen, the original graphic novel. And that's something that Zack Snyder never understood. It was like, oh, it's a full, it's a great, fun, revisionist comic. Let's turn it into a movie. Yay! No, that wasn't Alan Moore's idea. Same thing with V for Vendetta. That was not Alan Moore's intention from the beginning. I mean, Alan Moore was writing a clear political track in both Watchmen and V for Vendetta. That they turn it into the studios and the directors like Zack Snyder turn it into something else. That's another story.
Yeah.
But those books were political, and they were written with a specific mindset, a specific point of view about this genre and this type of characters.
I'm sure you read Scorsese's essay in Harper's where he's talking.
Yeah.
It's like a love letter to Fellini, but he's also saying like cinema's dead, right? And it's a love letter to Fellini. Made me want to watch. I haven't really watched Fellini, and I want to watch Fellini. I try to watch Seven Samurai. It's a long film. It's black and white. I tried. I'll try again. It's like with Dante's Inferno, one of the classics. You try when you're young, and maybe you're not ready for it yet.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but when you're dealing with films like, again, you're mentioning Seven Samurai, those are films that, honest to goodness, it's great to have them on DVD, but they don't lend themselves to a home watching experience. I'm sorry. We are going into this like celebration of streaming services and whatnot, and I will argue that there are films that lend themselves very well to streaming, very well to your television, but there are certain films that do not lend themselves to that experience,
And directors say, I think Scorsese said that. I think Tarantino said that. He's like, I don't make my movies to watch at home. I make it for the cinema, for the theater. It's meant to be seen on a big screen.
In a big screen, but again, it's not only about where you see it, but how you see it. I mean, cinema is a communal experience. It is like going to church. You make a big deal out of it by taking your family and buying popcorn, what have you. I mean, if anything, one of the nice things about, I hate to call it a nice thing about the pandemic, but it is a nice thing, was the fact that we had this old way of watching films come back to life in the form of the drive-in, where you at least got some of that communal experience. Even though you were inside your car and you were tuning into a radio station to listen to the movie, you still retain that communal experience of going out with your family to watch something on the big screen and to show your appreciation by honking your horn, because it's not only about the fact that certain films are made for the big screen and are made to be watched at a dark theater, but there's nothing like that communal experience when you are sharing an applause, a laughter. I mean, and the same thing applies to concerts. Some of the stuff we've missed. I mean,
or restaurants.
Watching a concert streamed live.
I'm a restaurant fan, right? And like, so I'm always like, oh, let's go to this restaurant. Let's go to the restaurant. And my wife's a Grubhub, DoorDash fan, right? Like, and she'll say, what's the difference? Food is food. I'm like, no. There's a huge difference between going to a restaurant and ordering food from that restaurant.
Well, I will put it in terms of Grubhub. The big difference is that you're tipping the people who work at the restaurant, not the driver, and not paying.
That's another issue. That's a separate issue. Yeah,
that's a separate. But one of the things that I've missed about going out to live performances is the idea of applauding the artist. The artist lives off the applause of his audience or her audience, their audience. We were watching during last holidays with a friend here in this same dining room where, I'm doing this. We're watching a concert by Caetano Veloso, the great Brazilian singer-songwriter. He was streaming it live from his home in Brazil through Global TV. And we were watching it. And I don't know, I think it was through a YouTube channel. And it was great. And then we started applauding. And then I stopped and I realized, but he's not listening to us. Oof. We're applauding him, and we're applauding him out of habit and appreciation, but he's not listening to us. And then it dawned on me that the thing that a lot of artists, theater, dance, music, anybody who does live performance, the thing that they miss most probably the most, and that most critics and audiences and entertainment reporters are not talking about, is that immediate gratification, that thing that we have taken for granted, that thing we call the applause. Yeah. They're missing it because it's a way for us, the audience, to acknowledge how good they were, how, the magnificence of their performance. It's that sort of immediate gratification that a concert stream on this screen right here or a theater performance stream right here ain't gonna give you.
Yeah.
That's,
No, and you directors will say, or directors usually, they'll sneak into some theater in some town, right, incognito, and sit and watch one of their movies and pay attention to how the audience reacts, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's no better scene in the movies today to illustrate that than that one moment in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, when the Sharon Tate character played by Margot Robbie goes into that theater to watch herself on the big screen. And at that moment, she's just going to the theater to watch herself.
Yeah.
And she's loving that whole process of watching that big screen image and watching herself on the big screen. But when she starts hearing the people laugh and applaud, and you see that big, gorgeous smile on Sharon's face, because he realizes, it's what I'm doing means something to these people. It may be light, fluffy entertainment, but it means something to them. And this is the reward.
Yeah.
And my character up there on the big screen is not listening to it, but I'm here and I'm listening to it now. And that moment sort of encapsulates exactly what the movie-going experience is about, but it also captures what we've missed in the past 15 months by not being able to attend a live performance because of this pandemic.
Yeah. And people are saying, I don't think there's ever going to be live performances again. That's bull. I mean, there's just people, if you're human, we need human interaction. And even this, the goal of this podcast is to do in-person interviews, right? I want to be in the same room with you, right? Because there's a lot lost, right? Through the screen.
Yeah.
Like, I'm having a great conversation with you, but it only tells me that we'd have an even better conversation in person, right?
Exactly. So I think that's, and honestly, one of the things that really bugged me a little bit about the pandemic and the way the city of Chicago managed it, not in terms of the health side, but of the human side in the past year, was that I think the city of Chicago missed a golden opportunity in developing and being innovative about how to present arts programming to the audience and allow for some sort of limited capacity outdoors. We all knew by July that if you went outdoors, you weren't gonna get the goddamn thing, all right? We knew that the chances of you getting affected with COVID outdoors were lesser than inside an enclosed space.
I think it's like less than 0.1% people have caught it from being outside.
And we knew it by the middle to late last summer. So there was no reason why, in the case of the city of Chicago, there couldn't have been impromptu arts activities for the public with limited capacity that will have not only given folks here in the city a respite of everything that was going on, but will have given local artists a means to make a living. And I think this city lost a gold opportunity and still losing it. I mean, they pretty much have yet to announce, even though they said they're going to be outdoor events and what have you, they have yet to announce exactly who's going to be performing, how is it going to look like, when it's, I know we're going to have a couple of concerts in Millennium Park, but look, Riot Fest already had a schedule ready to go when they announced a couple of weeks ago. Lollapalooza had already scheduled to go, so they were making plans beforehand. They already had contracts.
And Chicago's
signed.
a city of parks. Chicagoans are meant to be outdoors.
Exactly. So to me, just like there's so many missed opportunities when it comes to the arts as to what the city could have done. It fell to the local organizations to tackle this on their own with very little support from the state or the city. Again, people like the Roosevelt Beach Cultural Center, they pivoted to a virtual, and that helped them stay alive and it helped local musicians. But they had to do it on their own, with very little help from the city or state, and then so on with so many other organizations. And that, I think, that was a missed opportunity to rethink how we present and how we do arts in the city through seating programs. It was a wasted opportunity.
Well, the powers that be only thought of the economy. They didn't think of humanity, society, the arts.
I think more than the economy, I think they were so scared because this was so new that they didn't know how to tackle it. And they played it so safe in so many ways, shapes, and forms that they locked themselves in this mode of thinking. We have to be safe. Well, it's not a matter of being safe. I mean, after all, there's an issue of health, mental health involved as well, that we're now realizing. It's like, oh shit, people are going to be dealing with mental issues, health issues from now on because of this pandemic. Well, yeah, hello. You're locked into your apartment for 15 years and you don't provide them any sort of like respite in the form of arts or anything. And it's all virtually. Well, of course, there's going to be some mental health issues moving forward. That's the thing that grudge the city the most. I mean, that I criticize the city the most about that. They could have pivoted really, if arts organizations could pivot really quickly, there's no reason why those departments in charge of the arts in the city couldn't have pivoted as quickly and thought of innovative ways that went beyond the virtual to do outdoor events for the arts community and for the residents of the city.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what you get when you have a prosecutor as mayor. You know, they're not going to be thinking about the arts.
No, they're not. They're going to be thinking about safety.
Right.
About being playing it safely, not about safety, because you know they
safety we learned through the pandemic means different things to different people, right?
Exactly. I mean, like playing it safely, you know, not taking any chances. They didn't want to take any chances. Well, you know, sometimes crises are the moments when you take your chances.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but crises are sometimes the best opportunity to take a chance on something new and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, well, then we can go back to normal when whatever that back to normal looks like.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your background, but I had an idea. You know, I had been hearing about Scorsese dumping on, stop making comic book movies, stop making Marvel and DC movies, and I get his point, right? It's not like watching not like watching something that you really have to sink your mind into, right? But then I was, over the past few years, I've been also reading Greek plays and Roman plays, and I'm thinking, this is the same thing. We don't have gods. What we have is comic book heroes. So what's the difference between, the Greeks putting on their plays with Apollo fighting, Ares, and us with, Aquaman fighting whoever?
Yeah. Well, those are in a way, the superheroes are the new mythology. I mean, they've become, in the last 20, 30 years, the new mythology. There wasn't much mythology behind them. In the 30s and 40s. It just, I will say, no, even before then, I think even in the 60s, when Marvel actually came out and Stan Lee was like the man, I think that's when you started seeing writers develop mythologies around these characters. I think more than anything, the big difference is that, with Greek, those classic Greek and Roman plays, it was all about the role these gods had on our destiny as humans and how we behaved as humans. It's not like these, our mythological superheroes are pretty much half human, half super powerful, what have you. I mean, there was this clear distinction between, and you can talk about it being about power as well. Those plays were about power, about the power of a few have over the rest of us, and those few being the gods. And how even somebody like a king was at the mercy of the power of these gods. So the king wasn't that all powerful. So it really, those plays were more about human nature, about power struggles, about things that were palpable. I mean, the Greek playwrights and the great Greek poets like Homer used this mythology to delve into human nature. And I'm not saying that comic book, like superheroes, don't do that. And we got to remind people that there's, the comic book world is a broad world. I mean, superheroes is a small fraction of it. If you look at the stuff that's being put out by Image comic books, you have these wonderful comics right now about, for example, I just read one called The Good Asian, a film noir-like story. Think Chinatown with an actual Chinese detective, very black and white. But it's a very film noir type tale that also dwells on the discrimination and immigration policies against Asian people during the 30s and 40s.
Wow.
And that's a comic. It is one of the best comics I've read this year so far. There's another one also from Image. Image is publishing some incredible stuff. Image is publishing, I just read issue 2, a story called Home, about this Guatemalan mother and her son who come in undocumented, they're going to live with their aunt, but they don't realize that on their way to the United States, things change. They're no longer can seek asylum. Obviously, they come in during the Trump era, and they're separated. The catch here is that the child, it's a 5-6-year-old child, has these distinctive powers that he inherited from his father. So you have this very powerful human story about immigration, about the separation of families that's very contemporary with that tiny little sort of supernatural superhero element involved in it. But the author is using that as a way to bring people in to talk about these issues. And apparently he's already gotten some hate email and hate tweets about it for the comic book. But what I'm talking about is like, when you look at the spectrum of comic books, superheroes is a tiny fraction. It's just that because they are very franchise driven and they're very franchise friendly, they are the ones that are dominating the conversation. They're the ones that are dominating the industry. So when it comes right down to it, one thing that, these superheroes can, I won't even dare compare them with those old Greek and Roman plays, because those dealt with actual feelings, with actual concerns, with actual ways to look at the world, and the way they would look at mythology and how that mythology impacted us. And again, it was all about power. These gods are all powerful. They hold our destiny in their hands. And how do we respond to that power? And that's what I think makes that big difference between those classic plays and those classic epic poems and what we get today from Marvel and DC.
That Guatemalan comic from Image you said, it reminds me of like when the first X-Men starts, right? And you see the young Magneto. You don't know he's Magneto, and he's in Auschwitz or Birkenau. I don't know where he's at. He's in a concentration camp, and he's separated from his family, and then you see that he can bend the bars, right? And then whatever that happens in the movie, I like that dynamic between the argument that happens between the whole movie, the whole series really, between Magneto, played by Ian McKellen, and Professor X, played by Patrick Stewart. Basically, is humankind redeemable? And you understand Magneto's position because he lived through the Holocaust, and I wish it would have been more like that.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the problem. The first two films started dealing with that, and then the franchise mentality took over, and it just went, it just went off the hill.
So how did you get into movies? I mean, you have a long career in movies. I mean, give people a sense of your background and where you've been, and how where does it start for you? The love of movies and
it starts with that. It starts with that. I still remember we will go to the movies every Sunday, and the city of Santur, which is right outside San Juan, during the 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s, was really the capital. That was really the heartbeat of Puerto Rico's arts community and arts activity. This Santurce is the town. It's the town that
kind of to this day. No, I mean, people say Santurce, and you kind of know that it's kind of the cultural center of Puerto Rico.
Because people are trying to bring it back, are trying to resurrect that cultural activity in the island. This is the area that brought us people like Andy Montañez. This is an area that was musically active. I mean, and I lived through the ends of that golden age when I was growing up in the 70s, when the two main avenues, Fernandez Juncos and Ponce de Leon, were the hub of the film-going activity in the San Juan metropolitan area before the shopping centers took over. And we will go every single weekend to those theaters like the Rex Cinema, the New Broadway, the Regency, Radio City. I mean, I can enumerate them in order: the Ambassador, the Paramount, the Metro. We went to the movies there. And then, when we moved to Bayamon and they started building these duplex, at the time they were duplex, not multiplexes, like just two theaters next to each other, because they were nearby, we started going to those theaters like the Cinema Center and the Bayamon West. So pretty much, it was like a ritual. Every Sunday we went to the movies. And then when I started delivering newspapers, like every single cent that I earned delivering newspapers, it will go either to buying books or going to the movies. I ended up studying here in the United States at Carleton College. I did my degree in English with a concentration in film and literature. Had a wonderful film teacher by the name of Vern Bailey. Took a lot of film courses: Bergman, French New Wave, German Expressionist cinema, Introduction to Cinema.
What's your favorite genre?
Oh God, I don't have one.
That's good.
I really don't. I'm much more of a director-driven film goer at times than a genre-driven. I think that's the one thing that I find dangerous among a lot of young critics today is their hyper-focus precisely in this franchise IP-driven stuff because it gets them hits, and they don't go beyond that comfort zone. I do think, and there are a lot of young critics that do go out of the comfort zone, but unfortunately they're a minority.
Right.
I see a lot of critics, younger critics, who all go for the same old. And I think that's pretty.
Is it them, or is that the studio industry's problem, right?
No, it's them. It's them, because it gets them the hits. It's safer to write about.
But that's what I'm saying. Like you just said, like the industry sometimes doesn't accept work that's too experimental, right? To go to Daniel Glover's point.
but you can go beyond that. I mean, you can look at the films that are being distributed by companies like Film Movement, Kino Lorber, you can even go at stuff like hell, even stuff like Searchlight, which is part of the Disney Emporium now that Disney acquired Fox. They do turn out some good independent films like Nomadland, you know. But I do see a lot of them that don't come out of the comfort zone. I mean, for example, for Gozamos last week, I reviewed a wonderful, moving, not great, not masterpiece, not groundbreaking, but it was a wonderful, delightful, moving Cuban documentary about two Cuban brothers, musician brothers, called precisely Los Brothers de Brothers, that is now available through virtual streaming. And I was the only critic in Chicago who reviewed it. Out of the dozens of critics that we have in the city, I was the only one who reviewed it. Well, everybody was turning their attention on whatever was big title was streaming that week. And that's what I'm getting at. You know, I see a lot of the younger critics, you know, like 20, 30 years younger than me, not going out of their comfort zone. You know, they are going after a specific genre because they love sci-fi, superhero, whatever, horror, whatever, and they're not going out of the comfort zone. That's why I mean, when I was a kid, yeah, I was gung-ho about science fiction novels and science fiction movies. But the more you learn about film, the more films you watch, the more you realize what a great world of films are out there. And, you know, when I talk about comfort zone, I'm talking about not getting out of American or English language genre films. You know, They don't even dare butter with the great stuff that's coming out from Argentina and Spain. You know, and I will argue that in the last 20 years, Argentina and Spain had done for the thriller, the political horror, you name it, any thriller, they've done for the thriller genre what Hong Kong did in the 90s with action films. They rejuvenated the genre to such a degree that even the United States started copying Hong Kong ways of filmmaking. Wow. You know, they started copying, and they even brought in Young Woo, for example. And if you look at the films, the political detective thrillers that are coming up from Argentina and Spain, they're incredibly good, terrific, well done, suspenseful as all heck, you know, shit in your pants like suspenseful in some cases.
Yeah.
But nobody pays any attention to those. It's like, you know, there were two, again, same thing, two great films called, there was one from Argentina called, oh, Jesus H. 4x4. 4x4.
4x4 was, I think I saw that. What is it about? I saw it at the Chicago Film Festival.
No, 4x4, it's a recent film from Argentina. It's the story of a petty thief in Argentina who is out to steal a car. He gets into the car, locks himself inside the car, and turns out that the car has been booby-trapped by its owner because it's so tired of having been robbed that he decides to turn his vehicle into a prison. And it's the efforts during the whole hour. It's a very tough, tight psychological drama about this kid who pretty much gets trapped in this car after trying to steal it. The voice of the owner coming out of the radio and taunting him constantly. And it's about, you know, the whole question in the film is like, how is he going to get out of the car? He doesn't have any food. He just drank all the water that he had on his backpack. He's locked. The windows are all tinted, so nobody can see inside, or nobody can, except he can see outside. And it's a terrific thriller, you know.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, Latino film is they're very philosophical, right? Like the what is it? The platform, right? That's what how it was in English. But the platform, right, where they're at the top, they get all the food, and then they have to share as it goes down, or else everybody at the top doesn't get anything. And that's
that was streaming. Yeah,
it's a sociological experiment, right? Basically, as a film.
Yeah. So you know, but again, that's a great example of a thriller-like film coming out from Latin America that nobody's talking about. Yeah. You know, because critics are the new generation of critics doesn't get out of that comfort zone of the English language genre film. You know, most of them. I don't want to say all of them because a lot of critics do get out of the comfort zone. I read some great critics here in Chicago nationwide who go out of the way to find out these new films, especially now with all these streaming services that are dropping films from all parts of the world without giving them any sort of publicity at all. Yeah. I mean, Netflix is a great case. You know, I wrote about Aquelarre for Mano, film that didn't get any sort of promotional support from Netflix. It just got dropped into their library, and good luck finding it. Yeah. There's a new one out from Mexico, El Baile de los 41, which is the true story of this group of gay men in Mexico at the turn of the century during the Porfiriato, who will meet because, you know, the gay community was persecuted in Mexico, and they will meet in secret to have fun, to get together, and all that stuff. And one of the folks who is accepted into this club is actually a nephew, a relative of Porfirio Diaz, and all hell breaks loose. And it's based on that true story on the persecution of the gay community in turn of the century in Mexico during the Porfiriato. Now tell me if any publicity has been done around that film. None whatsoever. I found out that it was streaming on Netflix on Facebook because friends of mine were watching it.
Yeah.
So that's the other challenge that we who cover film have right now, especially we like covering films from specific parts of the world, that we have to redouble our efforts in seeking these films out because most of them are going straight into the streaming services. You name them, Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, they're going straight into streaming services, but because they've been acquired, they're not original productions from these streaming services. They're just being, shuffled inside their library. Exactly, it's content. Good luck finding it if you're interested.
And there's an infantilization with these executives, right? They think the public's stupid, so they think, oh, this is going to go over their heads, and so there's like this infantilization of the audience, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you treat the audience like babies, they're going to act like babies, right? But if you treat them like they can appreciate a very well wrought and written film, then they will, right?
Well, and you see, and to your point, it's not like they're coming out and saying, we're going to treat them like babies. They have a secret weapon for that. It's called the algorithm.
Yeah. So not even babies, machines. They think they're machines.
Exactly. It's called the algorithm. You click on this film, I'm going to share with you 25 that look just like it because the algorithm says so.
Right.
So chances, I wonder if I click
Which
on
is ridiculous, right? Because we're human beings. So like I can like all of one thing, but I'm a human being, so I might like something that's completely I've never seen before, and I might love it. It might be my favorite movie.
Yeah, but that's the problem. If you, and here's the thing, if you find it and it's a unique experience, the algorithm will make sure to locate 20 other films that fit that experience. So they're gonna like to try to look for things that are similar to what you just engaged in. Whereas the whole point of a library, whether a film library, music library, book library, is that you discover something new that you are not.
I love that you mentioned library, right? Because they say that about a library, right? Amazon's great, right? But the thing about a library is that you would go to a library and just wander around the stacks, and you would find something and read a book that you would never have read.
Exactly. And in a way, that should be the fun of a streaming service. I mean, to me, that should be the fun about it. The fact that I'm able to find something on my own. Let me search it on my own. Let me use my own keywords.
Yeah.
Who knows what I'm going to find?
Right.
But again, the thing about it is like everything that we do in our lives is so algorithm driven that you can find something that's really fun and that you enjoy. They're going to fit in 20 other things that look just like that for you to watch or read or consume.
And I've been reading that the algorithm, it's not going anywhere. If anything, it's going to be intensified, and we're just living in that world now.
Oh yeah, no, we're stuck in the algorithm world. That's why I buy physical.
Good for you, man. You're doing God's work.
I buy physical. I buy books. I still buy CDs. I buy DVDs and Blu-rays. And here's the other thing too. I mean, with streaming libraries, if you look at Netflix, you can look at HBO Max, they pull and add content every month.
Right.
So there's no guarantee that the movie that you love so much is going to be there next month. Same thing when you rent a movie, or in some cases even buy a movie. There's been cases when you purchase a movie through some of these streaming services or Amazon, what have you, you think, golly gee, I got it, it's mine. And then within 90 days, because of some clause in the contract that you didn't bother to read because it was too long, that movie's gone from your queue and it's gone forever. And there's no way for you to watch it again 5 years down the road because you no longer have access to it. I mean, and that's the thing with, still with a DVD, you may have purchased it 5 years ago and you suddenly realize, oh my God, I had this film, I forgot about it. You pop it in and you watch it. You have the choice. Funny thing about being an owner, although, you end up getting, if you're like a heavy duty buyer of stuff like that, you end up with more clutter than you wish, but at least you own that piece of history. At least you own that and you have the choice to watch it whenever you want. It's there for you. And again, the thing with streaming libraries that they're gonna pull an ad content every month. Like, X movie. I saw X movie last month, and I want to see it again this month. Well, guess what? It's gone now.
Well, while you're speaking of that, defend me for a second against my wife. Defend the practice of watching your favorite movies ad nauseum throughout your entire life. Because I love to rewatch movies, right?
Yeah.
And she goes, "What? You've seen it already. Why do you watch it?" I'm like, "No. Every time you see it, you appreciate the execution. You appreciate the way something was said. You understand something that you didn't catch. Even on your 10th time, on the 11th time, you're going to catch something."
Because I will. Yeah, you're right. There's no two ways out. When you watch the movie for a second, third, or fourth time, you will discover something that you didn't discover before. Last year, and the same thing applies to books. Last year, I read Emma, Jane Austen's Emma, because the new version of the film was coming out.
Right.
And I hadn't read Emma since college. And I find myself enjoying it more and finding stuff now as an adult that I didn't discover back then as a college boy.
Yeah.
You know, you discover new elements to the work of art, whether you're listening to the same album over and over, whether you're watching the same movie over and over, whether you're reading the same book again, you know, you will discover something new. There's no way in heaven that you can watch a movie once, and especially when you're writing a review, and get everything down.
Right.
I mean, for example, there are things in The Heights that are so wonderful, you know, that I know I need to rewatch it at some point because there was so much good stuff going on that I know I missed it. You know, there's a wonderful scene in the film that's happening inside the beauty salon, and it's so perfect because it grabs the way Latinas behave and talk and chismean in a beauty salon. But you're watching that on the dark screen, and it's impossible for you to write everything down. You need to watch it again. You need to watch it again to see how it's edited, how they managed to capture that atmosphere, how they managed to catch the spirit of that place and of those women, and things that you recognize because, you know, you were taken to a beauty salon just like that as a little boy because your mom couldn't leave you with somebody else.
Right.
You know, you do need, you know, the more you watch a film, the more you appreciate, especially an incredibly good film, an incredibly enjoyable film, the more you appreciate how well put together it is. I mean, God knows how many times I have seen Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and how many times I love Ricardo Montalban standing up and finally finding the Enterprise going like, there he is. I mean, there's something incredibly enjoyable about moments like that in cinema.
And it's interesting that we watch movies or we read books, but, you know, most people watch movies looking for those moments of real life. You're going through all this art, and it's the moments of actual real life that you recognize that, oh, that's the great part.
Because you're looking for that connection. You're looking to connect to the film. The more you connect the film, the more authentic it feels to your own life experience. And I think that's one of the great things about In the Heights. I mean, I have to be honest, goodness, I never saw the original play, but watching the film at that moment when I watched it, like at the tail end of, I won't call it the tail end of the pandemic, but as things are beginning to lift off after 15 years of not being able to visit family and friends in our homelands, to not being able to be with family, to only having a Zoom conversation with them, to watch a Latino street in New York come to life the way it comes to life in The Heights, to watch all those cultural references. That connection is important. I mean, without that connection, that film means nothing. And I'm bringing In the Heights because it's the most recent example of a film that, you know, you end up connecting to it no matter how much you resist it, because you either don't like musicals or you have discrepancies with Lin-Manuel's politics, what have you. You know, I don't care. But you can't help connect to the film because the experiences there are so vivid and are so identifiable that there's no way. I mean, either you are the ultimate Grinch in the planet, the ultimate grouch, or you're lacking any.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, we look to connect with art, regardless of whether it's a movie, a song, a score, a book, a painting. We try to connect with it. It's unavoidable.
Let me ask you, how do you review movies? I mean, I remember reading something by Roger Ebert, you know, another fine Chicagoan. And I went to Roger Ebert because I loved his writing. You know, I didn't really know anything about film criticism, but then I learned through him about. Anyways, he said that, you know, I think he gave The Godfather 5 stars, and then he gave some Hollywood blockbuster superhero movie 4 stars, and people were like, "Well, how do you do that? How can you give The Godfather 5 stars?" And he goes, "No, I judge a movie based on what it is. what it's trying to do. Like when I go to watch a superhero movie, I'll rate it as a superhero movie. I'm not comparing it to The Godfather. So I mean, how do you go about reviewing?
I apply the same philosophy, but the one thing that I admire about Roger is that he perfected the art of writing in deadline, because this was a man who would write 4 or 5 reviews in a sitting. I like the movie to fester in my brain for a while.
Right.
I'm sorry. I'm like the one that I like to think about what that movie did to me. It's like, I don't know if I will have the capacity of a Roger Ebert or a Michael Phillips of writing like 7 reviews in a week for a daily. I don't know if I will have.
Even when he was dying, he was still writing like a man.
He was still writing a lot. I mean, but once you hone that discipline, because it's a discipline, it's easy.
Obsession. So it becomes an obsession.
But it's a discipline. I mean, it is a discipline like any other.
Right.
I like each movie. It's its own entity, but there are certain movies that you need to look at within the context where they're happening. So for example, New Order is a perfect example. This is a movie again that talks about mass protests, and we are living in turbulent times. So it's unavoidable for you to look at a film like New Order of The Boy from Medellin and put it in the context of things that are happening in the respective countries. It's unavoidable. Movies do not exist in a void.
Right.
Granted, they may be made in a void because these are films that planning and production started 2-3 years ago.
Right.
And it's suddenly they happen to tap into the zeitgeist of the moment.
Right.
But you need to acknowledge that zeitgeist. You need to acknowledge the moment, because all of a sudden that moment makes them more relevant. Yeah. So, when I look at a movie, I like for it to fester a little while in the brain. Like for example, next week I think two easy ones are going to be to write for a film critic are going to be the ones for A Quiet Place and Cruella. Those are going to be easy to write because, you take them for what they are.
Right.
These are. One is a chapter, really more than part 2 is chapter 2 of a long novel that God knows if it's gonna get a chance to finish. And Cruella is what it is. It's a franchise film. It's an IP-driven film from Disney, and you have to review it as such. Okay. But when you have films like New Order, like The Boy from Medellin, like others, then you need to look at the context, and that's why you need to let those, brew in your brain for a little while longer. And I like that idea of letting it brew for a couple of days. And then the other thing and again, the nice thing about working, writing for websites, that you have a little time to do a little bit more research, and I look at production notes, I look at interviews. So to get an idea as to where the director is coming from and, whether he was successful in doing so. The more informed your review is, the better. That's what I like to think in those terms, that the more informed that review is, the better, because you're bringing, if you want to engage your audience in a conversation, you better make sure that your side of that conversation is well informed.
Right. Exactly. I love it because for mono, in the website age, like you're saying, there's this whole idea of being first. And I realize with our resources, we're not going to be first, and so that kind of relieves pressure, and it actually allows you to focus on, okay, let's create great content, and rather than first content. We want to be timely, of course, but let's have the. If your comment is coming a week or two later after the fact, make it a good comment, make it memorable. Yeah.
Well, and to give you an example, I mean, now in June we have these two high-profile Latino films coming next to each other. In the Heights and the Rita Moreno documentary, one week after one coming literally within weeks of each other.
Right.
And I think it's important to look at those films not only separately but as part of this continuum of Latino participation in the industry. I wish Rita Moreno will come before In the Heights, because then it will make a nice little before and after kind of argument. Whereas now we have an after.
No, pretty good.
Now we have an after and before kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when I was talking about context, there's no way in heaven that as I start thinking about my review for In the Heights, that I can't think about a Rita Moreno documentary and how can I bring those two together and sort of even though it's in separate weeks, each review mirror the other, because they all, in a way, are product of an industry and are product of a need, or engage in discussing that need for more participation, more Latino participation in front and behind the cameras. Right now, by just people publishing it because they want to celebrate a great film, hooray for them. But they're missing, to me, a larger part of the conversation, we should be engaging in now.
That's the other thing. People think being a cheerleader is the thing to be, but if you want to be an advocate for Latino art, take it seriously, right? Criticize it, like do like how white critics criticize The Godfather. Take it seriously, dissect it, give it your full attention.
And I'm not saying they're not.
Right.
I'm just saying, by falling prey to this firstism mentality, you're missing the opportunity of engaging the audience in an actual dialogue as it's going on. Yeah, you're creating a sense of expectation. Now you're creating a need for people to watch this film, and that's great. You're creating a sense of anticipation.
Wasn't it true that people reviewers, publications that review films, they want to give good reviews that little excellent, fascinating, so that the movie can use it as part of their PR?
No, not really.
No?
The real critic, the true critic, doesn't do that.
Okay.
Usually the studio chases after those reviews. It's only those who participate in the game, and those are usually not real critics. Those are people who in the old days were paid by the studios to travel to these young kids, and they were the ones who will grant quotes to the studio reps as they were coming out. A true critic, and most of the quotes you'll see on these ads are from actual honest to goodness, responsible, moral, ethical critics who sit down and watch the movie. Those critics those quotes are actually pulled out of the review, of the published review. Now, here's the thing that has happened. Studios and PR agencies will be so desperate for a positive quote that they even will look at a negative review, and if they find at least one word, just the one word that may make it look positive, they will pull out that word. So, for example, I could say X movie could have been more riveting and suspenseful. Well, the rep from the studio will pull out riveting and suspenseful. Even though I said,
right,
it sucks because it could have been more of this, but they will pull out those two words. So yeah, those quotes that you see, 99% of those come from actual reviews. And there are the exceptions that in the process of coming out from actual reviews, the studio will sort of manipulate it in such a way to make it, a bad review look positive on their advertising.
Yeah.
And it's happened because, if you go through film Twitter, you always find somebody going being amused at the fact that they pull out a quote from the review out of context to sell the film.
It's sad.
And we'll have a laugh at it.
I wanted to ask you too. So this is kind of like getting in the weeds, but I've reviewed films, and I'm probably going to be asked to review films sometime in my career. If some know nothing editor asks me to do it. But I remember reading that Roger Ebert, he would say that he would sit there in the theater writing notes, and he'd write 7 pages, just drop the page on the floor and write another one. Is that what you do? You write notes while you're watching?
While I'm watching, yeah. The nice thing about streaming most films today, I can hit the pause button and write much more comprehensive notes that I can in the dark. In the dark, it's at that moment you write it and you write 2 or 3 or 4 words with a little bit of a description. Now, good luck trying to make sense out of that when you come out of that dark screen.
I've done that when I went to do the Chicago Latino Film Festival. I'm like, well, how do I review a film? And I read a bunch of Roger Ebert, and I read that he did that. Yeah, I'm in the theater, on my knees, not knowing what I'm writing, and it looks like chicken scratch, like I had a seizure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's the thing. You got the challenge there is to make, and I think the challenge is more than anything, the technique should be just write 2 or 3 or 4 brief words that will, as you look at those notes, trigger something in your memories you're writing about that film. But always, and here's the other thing, I will always say, keep your production notes handy, whatever film it is. If you have the production notes, keep them handy, because I have seen reviews in which they have, because they don't have them handy or are writing in the dark, that sometimes they either get a detail or a character's name or something wrong because we're writing in the dark.
Right.
And we're trying to make sense of the handwriting.
Very nice. Very nice. I think we'll end up with that line right there, writing in the dark. That might be the name of this episode. Thank you again. Let everyone know where they can find you on social media, or your writing on online, everything like that.
Online, well, besides Mano Magazine, on gozamos.com, visit and support gozamos.com. We're doing some good work there, a lot of it volunteer. efilmcritic.com, which is a nice little international repository of film critic voices. The design may not be much, but you'll find a good chunk of good variety of voices in there. And pretty much you can find me on Twitter. Not hashtag, what is it? Handle, Alejandro Riera. Keep confusing these terms. Alejandro Riera on Twitter.
What was that thing you were in a discussion on, and I retweeted it? somebody was talking about, a woman was talking about, what was she talking about?
Oh, Monica Castillo, who works for Colorado Public Radio as a film critic with a rap. We were talking about, and it's a very interesting and very important conversation to be had about, in a way, Latino representation
Right.
in the arts coverage, in newspaper arts coverage. Especially the fact that in these days and age, sometimes Latinos are only hired as freelancers and not as full-time reporters to cover the arts. And in some cases, outside of this conversation, they're only hired to do Latino stuff, as if the only thing we knew was Latin American art, and we can't cover a mainstream gringo film, okay? And I felt that it was important to point out that one of the problems that we have now when it comes to mainstream print publications is that a lot of newspapers and a lot of magazines have been shedding writers, most of them white. I mean, most of the arts criticism done in the last gazillion years has been by white men and women.
Right.
What happens when those white men and women retire and a newspaper is cutting costs? Those places are not going to be filled ever again. So there's very little chance for a minority arts and entertainment reporter to secure a full-time job in a major publication. Like, for example, the Tribune, which today was officially, the sale to Alden Holdings was officially approved by Tribune shareholders, which means that most probably Tribune will be stripped down to its bare bones. Well, the Tribune lost its architecture reporter about a year ago, I think, so far. Position closed. They never hired a replacement. Great opportunity to get a Latino to write about architecture, ain't gonna happen. They lost their pop rock critic. He retired a couple of years ago. Are they doing any pop rock reviews? Not really. Same thing with the jazz critic who started doubling as their classical music critic. Have they filled that position? No, frozen. So the point is that whenever a major print publication, be it magazine, be it newspaper, be it a local community newspaper, starts shedding their arts and entertainment reporters, don't expect those positions to be filled by any reporter, much less a person of color, because they're gonna shut down that position to save money. I mean, for the Latino Film Festival, because we expanded the streaming to the Midwest, I started contacting a lot of the major newspapers across the Midwest. And I remember getting a response, the only one actually, from the St. Paul Pioneer Press. And they told me, look, sorry, but we're no longer doing movie reviews. We're down to me, the editor, who's doing just about everything, and a music writer. And that's it. So when it comes to Latino representation in the field of arts coverage in most mainstream publications, I think we're gonna have to depend more on independent venues like Mano to have those voices heard. There's been a lot of conversations about the not-for-profit model for local news coverage. My problem with those conversations is that they're limited only to local hard news. Arts hasn't been part of that conversation. Oh, sports has, because it's considered hard news and it's part of the community. But when it comes to arts, those not-for-profit projects are not talking about the arts. So it's a very difficult situation. So that's why I made that comment on Twitter, because I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that once those positions are gone in these major print publications, they're gone. The chances for a person of color, a reporter of color, to be hired as a movie reviewer or movie critic, as a theater critic, as an architecture critic, are slim to none in these publications, because either they're frozen or they're forever gone.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why I'm proud to have launched Mano with you and have you as our movie editor, because I used to read the Tribune, right, and I used to love reading the Tribune, even if I agreed with some of their columnists, right. It's just a newspaper is so important, especially to a city like Chicago,
right?
And the Tribune,
right?
I mean, and if people don't, you're just kind of leaving them to the winds, I'm an anarchist. I'm a libertarian, so I agree. I like the idea of decentralization, but I also want they have the money, they have the resources. They could be pouring, instead of cut the CEO salary and hire a movie editor, man.
Or beef up your staff, beef up your editorial staff. Right. I mean, now that we mentioned, look at the Sun-Times. I mean, a lot of people have criticized that part of their owners is a union and what have you. But the Sun-Times has invested on their editorial team. They've hired reporters. They found foundations to pay off some other reporters to be covering important issues in the community. I mean, the Sun-Times, frankly, 3 years ago, a lot of us felt that the Sun-Times was going to go down the drains, that the Tribune was going to be the one who make it, that is what's going to be a one newspaper town with the Tribune. Now, with the approval of the sale of the Tribune to Alden Holdings, it could very well be that, it will be a one newspaper town, but that newspaper will be the Sun-Times.
And is the Sun? I haven't been in Chicago in a while, but sometimes it's a liberal one, right? Progressive, you would say, is sometimes.
The thing about it's like it's something that. But what I find interesting is that twist of fate, because we've all felt like 3-4 years ago the Sun-Times was going to be the one down the drain, but because it was acquired partly by the Words, and then the Words I think sold it. I need to remember that history again, look into that history, but I know part of it is owned by one of the big local unions. That it started investing in its reporters. It started investing in its editorial team. It's a little bit stronger now than it was 4 years ago. And I'm quite sure it can be much, much stronger down the road if those investments continue. But the one paper that we felt was going to go down the drain is the one that looks healthy right now, whereas the other one is being acquired by these hedge fund vultures, When I talk about the twist of fates.
When I saw the New York Times a couple of years ago, they got rid of their copy editing department. And then ever since you see all these errors, typos in the New York Times, right? Again, that might not mean something to most people, but when I come across an error in something that's supposed to be in the New York Times or a published book, I'm like, okay, how much effort did they put in this?
Right. None at all.
Well, thank you so much, Alejandro. I mean, everybody come to Mono Magazine, read his stuff at gosamos.com, find him on Twitter. Thank you so much. You've been sending me great movie recommendations, so I appreciate it. And let people. You're looking forward to people seeing In the Heights. Anything else you haven't seen yet that's coming out that you're looking forward to?
Honest to goodness, there's the one film that I'm actually. There's a couple of the big screen, big Hollywood, big studio films that were not released last year are being released this year now. The one that I'm honestly looking forward to is Dune, the new adaptation of the Frank Herbert novel, Denis Villeneuve. Which is split in two, and that's a wise choice because Dune is like a humongous novel. Which I need to read.
Might have to dive into that. I tried to read it. It was like a Ulysses. I tried to read that a couple of years ago, and I was like,
I read it in college and loved it, and then I read Dune Messiah and loved it, and then Children of Dune lost me completely. I haven't read anything of the Dune series.
How many pages is it? Like 1,000? It's like the Bible.
No, I think it's about 600.
Oh, it's not bad.
600 is not bad. He wrote like about 4 or 5 more after that, and then his son took over the mantle and wrote like 3 or 5 more. So like there's a whole series about it. But from my understanding is that they go down in quality after the 5th book. Okay. So, but that's one that I'm really looking forward to. There are a couple of I need to do more research on this. Samuel Goldwyn is releasing an Argentinian thriller called La Dosis around June 11th. I need to do some research on that. I mean, it required the screener. I'm not quite sure if they're releasing it theatrical or only streaming. I also need to look at that. Yeah. So there's that. There's Dune. And, I'm a big James Bond fan. So I've been looking forward to No Time to Die since they announced it last year. And come on, you got Ana de Armas kicking ass in that movie. I mean, seriously, a James Bond geek like me cannot.
I love James Bond. I really love James. What is Idris Elba still is he still in the running for that? For James Bond?
I think this is going to be Daniel Craig's last film.
Right, I heard that.
As Bond, but there's been no discussion about who's taking the mantle. Yeah,
we'll see.
I'm looking forward to him doing Knives Out too. I'll be honest with you. I'm looking forward to that.
Knives Out was good too, right? I mean, I like those movies that they're not trying to be anything. They're just their own thing, right?
Yeah. They're just pretty much an Agatha Christie pastiche, and that's all I care.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
Take care. You too, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.